right. I think let's begin. Carl, you ready? Okay.
Yep.
So welcome to Agora Insights. My name is Deirdre Karen, for those who don't know. And today we're going to be talking about the business analyst to business architect. Well, we're going to talk about the course, but I'm going to just talk about the role really, and what does this mean, and what are the things that you could consider in this role. And so someone like Marius, who's just getting into the role, he's disappeared. He's going to be transitioning from a BA to a BArch. All right, so let's have a look at what we're doing. So just a bit of an introduction. 20 clicks later. So as I mentioned, my name's Deirdre Karen. I'm the founder of Agora Insights. I've got Andre with us. He's one of the directors of the organization. Carl is one of our lead trainers. He's a TOGAF approved trainer. He's Archimate approved trainer. He is an awesome modeler, which is why he's here today, and a fantastic consultant. So all of these are really good traits to have in a team. We do also have several clients that we've been working with over the last 2 years. We've got Stanford, we've got Salesforce, Bank of England. So we have a lot of great clients and great students. We are now in, I don't know, Andre, you can probably correct me, but I think it's 86 countries around the world where our students come from. So 89. There are a lot of BAs, 89. Okay, thank you. So there are a lot of BAs and BArchs around the world looking to get certified and looking to get quality training. So today I'm going to talk about the training that I'm doing. There is a clip in that Carl is going to be bringing in, but I'm going to talk about the business analyst to business architecture, program that we run, and talk about what you can get out of it. And also what are some tips in the transition from BA to BArch. So what are we going to be covering today? Firstly, we're going to talk about being the conduit of information. And thanks, Sebastian, for adding a little bit about yourself. If the rest of you that have just joined can do that in the chat, that would be great. So as business analysts, we are the conduit of information. And so are business architects, actually. We are taking information from one state to the other. So we'll be talking about what that means. We'll be looking at what is the role of a business analyst versus a business architect. We'll also look at what do business analysts do in very simple terms. And then we'll look at what do business architects do. And then we'll bring in some tools and libraries. And this is where I'll pull Carl in to give you some tips and tricks on some of the techniques that we use. And then we're going to open up with a Q&A session. So the Q&A session is really ask any questions around BA to BArch. It's an open forum, and I welcome, anything that relates to that to allow you to understand the role a little bit better and understand the transition. So let's just first talk about depth. When we work as business analysts, we often have to do requirements and we have to discover what we need to deliver within our project. And I will talk about the knowledge brief in a bit, but we really have to deep dive into what is required for a change. And a requirement is almost like a specification of a future state, and how that links with the particular area that we are working within. However, when we look at architecture, we have a bit of a different picture. Here we're looking at a bird's eye view of the organization. We're looking at how the organization functions, what are the patterns, what are the roadmaps, how do they relate to each other. So an important component of business analyst to business architect. And I'm not sure if you can see there's some people in the waiting room. There's an important component with business architecture is that we're looking at what I would call the breadth. And so when I spoke about the business analyst, we talk about the depth, we talk about how many layers you've got to go into in order to, get the requirements of the business. But when you are looking at the business from an architectural point of view, you are looking at the breadth. And so the breadth is really something where we look at how do we take our strategy, our objectives of our organization, and how do we build this picture of what do we see happening? And this is why strategy is so important. We look at how the strategy of the organization is structured, and then we determine the breadth in terms of architecture. And then business analysts typically go down into that level of detail of what's required to reach that future state. Now, I say that, and in a perfect world, this is how it would all work. But sometimes we work, in between. So sometimes the business architect is doing a little bit of depth as well, because part of what business architects do is also analysis. But the depth, what I refer to when I discuss depth, is that depth is around, how much information is required, and breadth is around how broad the information is that we need to capture. So as business analysts and business architects, we both perform a very similar function, where we, as I mentioned, are the conduits of information. So we know that in our organization, we start with data, and data is around gathering the parts. And so we would look at recording data, absorbing data, and then when we go into our information layer, we look at connecting these parts. So we've got information or data that we've collected, and this can be through various means. This could be user stories that you've captured. This could be your documents that have been reviewed. And then we look at, putting this into some kind of knowledge. So what is the difference between a business analyst and a business architect? And so this is quite important because, as I mentioned, we talk about the breadth and the depth. So business architecture is, we will look at the knowledge base in terms of what are all the key business architecture blueprints and designs based in our knowledge base. So we will try to capture all of the information that's necessary. And this is an important word. Architecture is not about capturing everything. It's about capturing what's needed in the organization, cataloging, categorizing, putting it into some kind of order. And that knowledge base should eventually have some kind of tool, which makes a lot of sense. But it depends on what the organization is using. Business analysts, on the other hand, look at really focusing on the information and the knowledge required for a particular change. So not a change in the sense that it needs to be, a change needs to just be on the whole organization. No, rather we look at a particular change that is required within an organization. So this will typically mean we have a project, or we have a particular initiative that we are providing information and knowledge for. So overall, both business architects and business analysts are gathering information. They're putting information together to form knowledge, and they are providing this information to organizations so that they can make good decisions, right? And that's really the goal. So we hope they make good decisions, don't we, Carl? So from a business architecture point of view, and I just want to remind you of that breadth and depth picture. As a business analyst, we're going down into the depth of the knowledge that's required in order to create a change. Whereas in business architecture, we are having that bird's eye view of the organization to categorize, succinct, put it all together. So if we look at the difference between what business analysts and what business architects do, I want to remind all analysts that you're in business to analyze. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we talk about business analysis as the document catcher of requirements, which is not, it's not what you're meant to do. Now, business architects also analyze. So there is a really close connection, but what business analysts do is they really look at gathering all the parts. They look at putting these parts together. That could be through user stories, interviews, workshops, etc., on a particular, let's say, change initiative. And so I use the example here. If this person is a business analyst on the left-hand side, they're focusing on, or she's focusing on, gathering information. And this information is then going to be converted into requirements at some point. So, and I use the term investigative journalist to describe what business analysts do. On the other hand, you've got your architecture, which really is about cataloging, collecting, collating, analyzing what information you have within your organization and what decisions you're going to be making. So we have a knowledge base, which is where we store all of our information as business architects. And then as business analysts, we have what I call the knowledge brief, which is to take a component of the knowledge base and put it into some kind of alignment. So let's look at the 10 things that business analysts do. And people can argue with me, that's all right, but right now, this is what I'm going to be explaining. So when a change occurs, business analysts essentially look at what is the change, what is the background of the problem. So we need to dig into finding out why we need to change as an organization. And there could be many reasons. It could be just an improvement. It could be digital transformation. It could just be enhancements. But this is usually specific to a project. And I'll explain the difference between a project and an initiative, but it's typically a piece of work that needs to be done. And we would analyze what the strategy is for this project. We would write a background statement. We would discover what the problem statement is. We'd look at critical success factors to measure what success would look like in the future. And we'd do a root cause analysis. Once we've done that, we would then be working with our stakeholders. We'd review the current state of the organization. We would do our business requirements, the big fella. We'd look at our future states, our cost to benefit ratio from what we're changing, and then we'd make recommendations. So this is what business analysts are typically doing in projects. So this picture I showed you in the very beginning. And so as business analysts, we have our 10 key activities that we do. Now, if we're looking at business architecture, and this is the, kind of knowledge base, we model things and we put things into some kind of coherent pattern. So we go, all right, there's lots of information. So we look at strategy, we interpret strategy, we model things, and then we look after our knowledge base. Those are the key things that we do. And these are the things that we model. So we look at our capabilities, probably the most important thing for any business architect to know about. And these are our building blocks in our organization. This is what we do. Then we look at value streams, and value streams is why we do it. Why are we providing value? Why are we, what is that value that we provide in? Then we look at organization, who is involved, and we look at organization broadly. We don't look at organization as a single person, like a business unit. We look at it beyond the actual organizational chart. We would bring in people like vendors and different service providers. So anybody that helps us fulfill a capability in the organization. In the course, I use the example of McDonald's. McDonald's doesn't only have one org chart. They have many providers that work in and outside to provide the capability that's required for McDonald's to function. And then we look at information concepts, which you can see is closely aligned to data architecture. And so information concepts is around the cataloging of the information that we have and how this all comes together. Now, again, I want to take you back to the picture that I showed in the beginning for business architecture. You are creating a pattern and a plan of what the organization does as a whole. You're not looking at the depth of a project. You're looking at how that project will impact the organization. So the depth and breadth is a key component when we discuss what business architects do. And as somebody who understands the breadth is somebody who's a big picture thinker. And so I always say, as a BA, you need to understand if you're a big picture thinker. That's the most important thing when you're doing any type of architecture or enterprise architecture. And then having some design skills is probably really helpful as well, because the difference between a BA and a BArch is probably the ability to design the organization, which you don't really need to do with requirements. You would do processes probably, which is a design component, but I think systems design is a little bit more complex. So how would you bring these two together? And in this course, the reason why I structured this course, and this is really important, is in your BABARC guide, there's a chapter 11, which discusses the role of a business analyst playing business architecture. And I've played both roles before. And I absolutely can see the value of having a good architecture if you're doing a project. Can you imagine a whole bunch of BAs, deep diving into all of these projects, trying to fix problems in certain areas without having a big picture view? It doesn't make any sense. And it means we're going to have waste of work, waste of time, waste of resource, and we're probably not going to reach the objectives that we want. And that's the reality. And so for BAs who've worked in projects for a long time, who go, oh, but we did something like this in another project, then you know that this is probably due to the fact that we have this misalignment between the depth of work that we're doing in an organization, the strategy that's required, and how that all links to the initiative. So if we looked at what architects are doing, they're creating the big picture view. And initially, architects would look at analyzing the strategy and working on the blueprints associated with aligning the strategy for the organization. What business analysts do is they analyze the strategy to ensure that the change that's needed is in line with what's required. And in business architecture, we talk about initiatives. So an initiative is not the same as a project. A project is about budget, time, money, management, etc. We talk about initiative. It's about the changes that occur to our capabilities. And so there is a slight difference, but I won't go into the detail. I do, in the program, but the key here is if we go back to that breadth of looking it'll be around what's changing in that area, not just what that individual project is busy looking at. And so what we do as business analysts, our lives would be so much simpler if we had the depth of information that business architecture can provide in our projects. But as a BA, and this is where you're almost working between the two roles, as a business analyst, you can start bringing in architecture into your work too, which is exceptionally helpful because anyone who's captured requirements before will know how long it takes to capture requirements. It's scary. You're interviewing, hundreds of people and asking questions and going kind of a bit in loops when it comes to projects. Whereas with a good architecture in place, you actually can gather that information. Remember, we're the conduits of information from your architectural knowledge base, and you can pull that information together. So that's the benefits of having a good, solid architecture and a good, solid analyst who's going to look at strategy and look at what we're doing and use the knowledge base, use the information we have from architecture to derive requirements and solutions. And remember, requirements come from business analysts, not from projects. Business analysts analyze what business needs in order to make change. So if you transition into the role of a business architect, some of the key things you do need to know is that you need to understand how architecture fits into our projects. And I always say to BAs who are transitioning, take off your BA hat because you've been taught about processes, you've been taught about how projects run, you've been taught about how all these things are structured, and put on your business architecture hats and think like an architect, think big picture, and then take your knowledge, your experience from how projects are working to really help you construct your architecture well. As I mentioned in the beginning, and this is where I'll bring you in, Carl, as I mentioned in the beginning, the strategy to modeling, we have several techniques that we use in both business analysis and business architecture. There's one that isn't really being used in business analysis, which is the Hush and Cunray, which is probably the best technique you can use as a business architect and analyst, because it's around deployment and it's around functional decomposition of deployment at multiple levels. So as we are working, let's say, in the breadth as a business architect, we look at the strategy and we use several techniques and tools in order to really understand what the business wants to achieve, what their overall goals are, and how it would be structured. When we work on strategy analysis as a business analyst, we take a pool of information that we've derived from the business, and we analyze how that change is going to affect the organization, that particular change. And so we use very similar techniques, but it's again, the depth and breadth at where we're working at. So one of the things you'll find is that business architects, we look at several tools and that governs us, but we do have this knowledge base that we're working with. So I'm going to flick over to Carl now. By the way, you can explain a little bit around this in a minute, but just before I go to you, Carl, I just want to discuss that in your course. So this is a certified course from business, the IOBA, so the Business Architectural, the Institute of Business Analysis, so the IOBA. But the course is actually designed between the business architecture body of knowledge, so what we know from the Business Architecture Guild, so the BizBoc, and it brings the business knowledge from the BABOC. So the two come together. And this was one of the really important things is that when we talk about the breadth and the depth of information, I'm wanting to bring the two roles together. So we have a bonus, and Carl's really very good. So let me explain. In your Babok guide, the Archimate is mentioned many times as an awesome tool to use when you're transitioning from business analyst to business architect. And so part of what we're doing in our course is we're going to be looking at some tools. And remember, there are many tools you can use as a business analyst, transitioning into a business architecture role. However, because it's mentioned so many times in your Babok guide, I thought it good to bring a specialist in. And Carl, just handing over the baton, and you can describe a little bit around this.
Sure. So thank you very much. So my name is Carl Stanley. I've been working in the EA, BA and business architecture arena for a few years now. As you can see, I've got some badges there on screen, and I'm now working along with Agora Insights. And as Deirdre said earlier, there's a journey that we go on: data, information, knowledge, and then wisdom. Wisdom is the why. So why are we doing some of these things? But in order to be able to give back these sort of insights to aspiring professionals, we have to know how, right? So when are we knowledgeable about something? When we know how it all hangs together. So when we all connect all the dots, and in this area, there's a lot of dots, right? There's business strategy, mission, vision, strategy, goals, tactics, objectives. And then we go from objectives into capability-based planning, and then all the way down into business data application tech. And so is there a modeling language, or is there a way to coherently put this all together? And that's what Archi, which is a free tool, helps you do, because it's around the Archimate modeling language. And so that modeling language has been around for a few years. And I find it quite useful, because it, as Deirdre says, it goes into a breadth, and then you can dive. It depends on how you want to model, but you can dive into a lot of detail. Not necessarily a lot of times to go into super detail. All right, when I mean super detail, there's some people who will model all the way down into the tech stack and what the network address card is. So we don't really need to go there. So we sort of bring it up a little bit higher. And so in our course, we've put two pieces. So as you see on screen, you see the section 1, which is on business strategy modeling. So using the business model canvas, the business motivation model, and then a well-formed business capability model, and you're plotting a few things on that capability model to give across insights. So all this modeling helps us get to the insights, and then we then plot that out on a capability model, which is an anchor model. And then underneath that, we have section 2. So I take you through a method to do some analysis. So I really like how Deirdre pointed to us being analysts. We do need to analyze things. And so there's a course of 60 minutes, a bunch of handouts that point to Power Query, Power Pivot, and using Archi, which is the modeling language, or the tool for the modeling language, which is Archimate. So that's what's a bonus in the course. And I've put them together. And if you have questions, I'm here for the questions.
So let's just quickly sum up. This session was about you having questions around the transition between the role. So I've given you an overview of what the difference is between, a very short overview between business analyst and business architect. And then Carl is the doer in this, where he is explaining how to use some of these tools, and particularly with Archimate. And so if you're transitioning from a role of a business analyst to a business architect, what are the tools you'll need? What do you need to understand about the role? What are the differences in tasks? And how would that all break down? So I can go and show some screens in a moment, but I thought maybe it would be good first to see if anyone has particular questions around what we've discussed or any particular questions around the role. Crickets.
How technical do you need to be a business architect?
You don't need to be technical. It's one of the reasons, Ruth, why I really put, I don't put an emphasis on the tools. And Carl, just close your ears. The role, just like a business analyst, you don't need to have all these amazing technical tools, you know, to be able to be a BA. What you're doing is you are managing information. It is good to be able to, at least at a minimum, use, and Carl, you can give some advice. Yeah, use simple things like Lucidchart, Excel spreadsheets, where you can actually just show the different capabilities and show the different information. So if you can do a process diagram, you can do business architecture. There are enterprise tools that you can use, but you don't have to necessarily use them. They're helpful, but you don't have to.
Yeah, so if I could, I guess, add just a little bit. So we're trying to get to that impact analysis place for our customers and the wisdom space. So inside some of these tools, if you just use, it doesn't have to be a super complex level of detail, you can get a lot of insights and keep track of those initiatives, those requirements, those strategies, and you can do it quite quickly. So yeah, there are viewpoints that are already canned inside the tools. So all you really need to do is connect some of those dots. And as you do one, as you do two, as you do three, they'll start to show you that impact, which is where you want to get to.
Hope that answers your question, Ruth. I see there's a question from James. When you mentioned big picture thinker, you know, what do you, can this be developed or is it a natural trait? What do you guys think before I answer? Carl, what do you think?
So yes,
I have my
definitely...
views, but I'm holding them just in case.
Do you need to be a big picture thinker? I think if you start to use some, again, I'm just going to go back to some of these tools. If you use the modeling language itself, it actually asks you those questions or prompts you on what things you need to be looking at. So even when you're taking notes in rooms, some of these tools are very easy. You can just do some search and you can find, okay, well, somebody said Microsoft. What does that mean? Somebody said, you know, this business capability, what does that mean? So it forces you to start thinking, not just in the technology lane or the app lane, or you start thinking across all the lanes and up into strategy. So yeah, I would say it's a learnt skill.
I think you need to learn it. I think that, so James, to answer your question, I'm almost nervous to answer your question. You need to be able to see a big picture. So if you can look at a diagram of a house, and you can look at a blueprint of a house, and you can see where the kitchen is, and you can see where the bathroom is, and you have an idea of how that all fits together, then you are essentially a big picture thinker, because you now have this view of how this works. Now, it's going to be quite hard for me to give you a direct answer whether you will be able to do it versus the general answer, but typically big picture thinking. Okay, let me just see what Andre says here. I would use house building example, believe that there's There is a test if you're a big picture thinker. As a business analyst, if you can picture in your head what you're putting together in your pieces, then you're a big picture thinker. Yeah, so similar to where I was leaning with this, if you can see what's going to come out of it when you look at a house plan, that is the kind of skill that you need as a business architect. You need to be able to put all the pieces together and say, this is how it's going to work. I think that you can learn many things. So I don't think that it always means that, you have to automatically be able to go and read maps and do maps. But you do need to be able to, when you think, pull a whole lot of maybe what may be perceived as unrelated events together to see how those relationships work. So in a building example, you've got a plumber, you've got a electrician, you've got a designer, you've got an interior developer, you've got the landscape. And as an architect, you would have to design it for all of those roles and all of those needs. They would go into the detail around how that, let's say the fridge is going to be working, etc., or the plumbing is going to be working. But an architect would look at the full picture and give an overarching design.
So maybe I can just add a little bit in there. So I usually try, and some of the classes I use, there's a layering, conceptual, logical, physical, and I illustrate it by, conceptually, we're on planet Earth. Logically, we're in Australia or whatever country, and then physically, we are at this address with this number. So if you can go up that ladder and then look out into the future at the concept, and you put your, I'm a company hat on and look out and say, okay, so what's in my landscape out the front? So who are the competition? What are their strategies? How do I compete? Those sort of things. You're starting to get at the front of the enterprise. And then if you can move down that stack into some detail, and yes, in the end, the rubber hits the road. It has to have a little bit of connectivity. And then, if you need to move your company into the future, you need to do capability-based planning and that sort of stuff. So you have to have a bunch of techniques and you have to have a bunch of breadth to see where you're at. So that's a big picture. You're building the whole thing. If you can do that, that's what's supposed to be in the back of the C-level's head. So, if you can wrap at that level, then you're doing well.
Thanks, Sebastian, for helping with that answer. And James, I'm glad. Give it a go. I say this with most things. I like to just caution people, but I also want to say, if you want to just try it, just try it. You can't get any harm from learning. Everything is about learning. Okay, my understanding, business architect is an extended, refined craft of business analysis. BA skills can be learned, so can business architecture. Yes, so there have been many times with business analysts when we first started. Like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years now. And when I first started as a business analyst, it was kind of like, you're now a business analyst, do stuff. And you have to just figure it out. And as we've started to learn stuff over time, things started to become clearer. And with business architecture, business architecture actually started in the 80s. And a lot of this was done because there was businesses going big. So they were franchising, they were doing lots of things. So architecture became key to bring some of these concepts together. And obviously when we go digital, I think one of the important things to remember though with business architects versus business analysts is the difference between boots on the ground, which is where your analyst typically works, and somebody who's building the strategy and the let's say, the strategy to go and move forward. So even though you might be doing similar roles, it's around the breadth and the depth. So, Anka, I'm trying to answer your question here. Yes, as BA skills have been learned, so can with 50K feet. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Sorry, that's probably just feet versus up. Yeah. Okay. Okay, yes. So once you've understood the depth, understanding the breadth is actually, I think, easier, to be honest. But there's a lot of information, and in projects. Yeah,
I heard a quote once. It was on every IT problem is fixed with a level of abstraction. So you abstract up, up, and up. So as we abstract higher, you get, if you're connecting certain dots that group a whole bunch of concepts, you can move very fast. So that's what meta modeling and those sort of things do. So you can, definitely, as you abstract up, it gets easier.
I actually took off the meta model in this presentation today because I thought there's too many images. But yes. Yeah, so some statistics, thanks for sharing, Andre, and I do provide this in the free preview of the course, is that 60% of business architects used to be business analysts. And as a business architect, you'll still be analyzing. You just won't be analyzing down to the requirements level. You'll still be analyzing, what is the business needing, what are they wanting, how it all comes together. So that's where the two really do work hand in hand, so I think it's a real advantage for a business analyst to become a business architect. I think it's an advantage to the organization because you understand the depth and breadth. Anka, did you want to say something? I see there's some people.
Hi, this is Ankur. I'm just, trying to watch what Carl has said that, IT problems can be solved with, with the level of abstraction as we go up. And I am thinking that it's more like, from a BA perspective, that how we use the 5 whys principles, why and why and why and why, and probably actually more or less, that's how I'm trying to map. However, I have a question that how do you guys, how do you guys think that enterprise architecture and business architecture, they hang together?
They work really well together, and actually there's 2 distinctions, right? So in enterprise architecture framework, business architecture is one of those parts. So you have business architecture, you have data architecture, you have technical architecture, etc. But business architecture is actually a profession, and this is how I explain it to people. So you don't have to be in a framework like enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture, you've got the Zachman framework, you've got the TOGAF framework, you've got the DODAP framework, you've got many frameworks. So the way I like to explain the difference between a business architect is I use business analysis. So if you're a business analyst, it doesn't matter if you're working in an agile environment or a waterfall environment or SAFe or any of those methodologies, you're still a business analyst because you still have to perform certain things. It's the same thing with business architecture. If you're working in enterprise architectural framework, like a TOGAF framework, you have to perform architectural tools, functions, tasks. But if you're not working in an enterprise architectural framework, you can still be a business architect. And this was one of the key things that I brought in very early on, because I had somebody come to me and say, can I be a business architect if I only have small startup companies that I work with? And the answer is absolutely, because you're doing the same thing. It's what you're doing. So it's not limited to a framework. Carl, you're welcome to add what you said.
I'm chomping at the bit. So if you look at all of these bodies of knowledge, and I guess I'm looking at the comments that are going in the chat there. If you're looking at all those bodies of knowledge, at some point they do overlap, right? But they're all basically structured with techniques and methods to do stuff. And as Sebastian says, it depends on the role you're playing, right? So the role that you're playing is, I'm a business architect. So I've got these techniques, I've got this bag of stuff, I've got these outputs that are supposed to happen. And this is how I'm going to do it. I mean, I might have a skill that that helps with that. So I might come from the business analysis background. I might come from, any number of backgrounds, but they all lend to a core skill where you're analyzing stuff and you're doing, from a business perspective, is it way out front? Is it down low? And so enterprise architecture just has a method, right? So it has a process that you go through, and then you have certain techniques. So some of these bodies of knowledge will call out, in business architecture, you need to do this. In data architecture, you use it to do the DMBOK. So, or in implementation and migration, you need to know the PMBOK. So these bodies of knowledge come together. But in the end, it's the perspective you're coming from and the actual tools and techniques you're using. So business architecture as a technique has its own frameworks, which we train on, and those techniques are, as good as any to get to the insights that you need. So you need to analyze, you need to be able to provide insights, and then use any number of techniques in your trick bag.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
Well,
I always find it useful too when you've got certain stakeholders, right, who are interested in your work. You have to be able to answer the so what question. So they turn around and say, "That's all fantastic. So what? What does it mean for me?" So you have to be able to answer that question. So if you can get to the wise insights and say, "Well, this is why it matters," and if you don't do that, this is the problem, and if you do it, it's a solution. You can help guide your stakeholders in the right direction. So getting to the why is a big one.
I also think that with your business architecture, you have, because you have capabilities, this is what we call the building blocks, what we do, and we don't repeat them. A capability is a capability. Customer management is a capability, doesn't matter what business unit you're working in. It's quite a mind shift for BAs who've worked with processes for many years, who think of all the different processes and kind of want to put them together. Architecture gets rid of all of that initially in the beginning, just to focus on the capabilities. So then when we know what we're doing as an organization, it makes it so much easier for us to manage change, because then we can say, what are we changing? And that helps, if you've done user stories before, but as a user, I want something so that I can do something. And usually we say the capability is what the user wants. And then to add value, we have a value stream. So in architecture, we're thinking about all the components of what we have as an organization. We're not thinking about how we are running our organization per se. Whereas a lot of BAs, because you've been so conditioned, it took me ages to kind of uncondition myself from process modeling, using APQCs and various other models, to go into capability thinking, which is and capability and competency are not the same thing. So do need to understand the difference, but that is a big challenge with the role, with business analysts shifting to business architecture, is really focus on understanding what capabilities are as opposed to processes. Thanks, James. So James said, I'm really pleased as the session reinforces what I have come to broadly understand about the role. Love the idea. The investment decisions are aligned with the blueprints. And so, yeah, makes so much sense, doesn't it? You
So-
see Carl's even nodding.
So,
He's like,
so if I may, again, in our class, in fact, we've gone through business strategy modeling, and it is actually to help align your investment, what the customer sees as important, and align your investment with in your projects and your initiatives as to whether they're aligned, and then plot that on a capability model. So there's some good techniques and some good methods in our courses, and to help mentor and get from a certain place like business analysis into the business architecture space, and using tools that are helpful for you to do. And really, the benefit is to you is that there's a differentiator, right? So it's a learning journey, but you're also differentiating yourself from a lot of other players that are playing in the same space you are, which is an advantage for you.
Yeah, it is a real advantage. I would agree with you there, Carl, because when you working in organizations, and let's say you are still a BA, to be able to think architecturally and be able to work with your enterprise architects and that team, and being able to speak the same language really does help, in terms of growing your career and growing where you want to go. Yeah, it looks like
Nice.
you do think big picture, James, after all. That's it right there. Yeah, getting a seat at the table. And I often say to BAs, have a good set of information with you. We talk about the knowledge brief. If you have a good set of information and knowledge that you can share, you can help influence decisions. It's the same with business architecture. You have a good set of knowledge that you can influence decisions in the organization. Remember, we don't really make the decisions. We're here to help businesses make their decisions, but you can certainly see if a project aligns or doesn't align with the overall strategy, and make recommendations that way. So I hope you understand the difference between a business analyst and a business architect, and look at ways in which you might be interested in shifting to that environment. If there are no other questions, I'm going to probably just close up. But what I do want to say is that there are free previews and free resources that you are more than welcome to use. So just go have a look at our site and have a little bit of a play around. As I mentioned, we have several libraries that are included. So the Archimate or the Archi library that Carl is discussing shows you how to load Archi free of charge onto your screen. He describes how to use each of those, 4 of the techniques that we discussed in the session. He also gives you a live case that you can use from Archi, which is great. We also have a business architecture library, which is all included. And this is comprehensive. It covers about 24 modules of information that you might need as a business architect. And then our business analysis library also has a significant, it's got hundreds of resources around what techniques business analysts use. And then obviously in the course itself, I explain what that transition looks like between BizBoc and BABOC. What does that mean in terms of your role? and how the body of alignment, the body of knowledges come together. I do want to highlight that this is an endorsed course by the IABA, and the IABA gives you 7 hours. So anyone who is already certified as a CBAP or CCBA, you can use those hours towards your continuing development units if you want to, use it for any of those areas.
That's cool.
And then, as always, if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to be in touch between Carl and I. I'm sure we'll be able to answer questions. Thank you, Andre. Yes, we will be able to do that.
Sorry, I just popped a link in the chat.
Okay. That might
Are
be,
there any
that might
links
be the
that we
wrong
can give
one,
out?
but that's okay. We'll
That's the
we'll
wrong one.
send an email to everyone.
All right.
Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, I'll probably end the session. Thank you for your attendance. Do have a look and do reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you where we can.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Deirdre. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
No worries.
Yep.